Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're exploring Anglophilia. That's an admiration or love for England, you know.
Right. It's people, it's culture, language, those accents.
Exactly. The word itself, it's a mix, isn't it? Latin angli for English and Greek philos meaning friend.
Yeah, basically a friend of England.
So fondness for England. Simple enough.
Precisely. And for this session, well, we've pulled together quite a mix of sources. They look at this affection for all things English from different angles and times.
And our goal.
Our goal is really to unpack the surprising history and the subtle nuances of Anglophilia worldwide, hopefully giving you a much richer understanding of it all.
It's got history too, right? I think Dickens used the word Anglophile way back.
That's right. One of the earliest recorded uses seems to be December 1864. Charles Dickens and his magazine All the Year Round.
What did he say?
He described a French magazine, the Revue de Monde, as an advanced and somewhat Anglophile publication.
Interesting. Okay, let's get into it. What does this love of England actually cover? What are people drawn to?
Well, what's striking is just how broad it is. I mean, on one hand, you've got this deep appreciation for history, for those big cultural icons.
Like Shakespeare, Austen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shakespeare, Austen, Samuel Johnson. And often there's this fondness for the monarchy, maybe the system of government, even institutions like, say, the Royal Mail.
Right. The really traditional stuff, the cornerstones.
Yeah.
But it's not all about the past, is it?
Yeah.
I've definitely met people fascinated by more, current English culture.
Absolutely. Our sources definitely point to that. A real enjoyment of English actors, authors still, of course. But also things like cars.
Oh, yeah. Like classic cars.
Yeah, think vintage Jaguars, classic Minis, that sort of thing. And fashion, films, those very British magazines.
Motorcycles, too, I bet. Triumphs.
You got it. Motorcycles, musicians, old and new radio dramas, even specific English subcultures, TV series.
And traditions, obviously.
And traditions, naturally. It's a really rich mix, a whole tapestry of cultural appeal.
And then there's the language side that always seems to spark discussion, especially over here in the U.S.
Oh, definitely. You see Anglophiles picking up British English spellings and phrases.
Like color with a U, center with U.
Exactly. Traveler with 2 L's. And interestingly, sources from around 2012, BBC News Online, the New York Times, they noted a real uptick in people using these British expressions.
In everyday American conversation.
Yeah, even in news reports sometimes.
I remember that. It caused a bit of a stir, didn't it? People maybe trying a bit too hard with the accent or using phrases slightly wrong.
Exactly. And it's interesting, Lynn Murphy, a linguist over at Sussex University, she suggested this trend seemed more concentrated in the northeastern U.S.
Maybe some kind of historical link there, or cultural.
Could be. It just shows how deeply tied language is to cultural admiration, doesn't it?
Definitely. Okay, let's jump back in time a bit. Where do the deeper historical roots of Anglophilia lie?
Well, a really key figure is Voltaire, the French philosopher, early 18th century.
Right. He spent some time in England.
He did, a couple of years in the late 1720s.
Yeah.
And it had a huge impact on him. He learned English, developed this real admiration for Britain.
Why? What did he admire?
He saw it as a place with more freedom. Freedom of speech, the liberty to say what you think. And doing business was actually respected, which apparently wasn't quite the case in France then.
So quite different from home.
Very different. And he put all this Anglophilia into his book, Letters Concerning the English Nation. It came out in English first, in London, 1733.
What was it about?
Loads of praise for British empiricism, this idea that knowledge comes from experience, from the senses.
And the French version?
The French version, Lettres philosophiques, came out the next year, and, well, it caused fireworks.
So?
It was seen as anti-church, anti-clerical. The Catholic Church protested. The book was publicly burned in Paris.
Burned? Wow.
Yeah. And the bookseller who sold it ended up in the Bastille. It's pretty amazing how a book could stir things up like that.
Talk about making waves?
Absolutely. But ironically, all that suppression just made it more popular. Underground copies went everywhere. It became a massive bestseller in France.
Funny how that works sometimes.
Isn't it? And what's really fascinating is that Voltaire's book basically introduced French readers to thinkers like Swift, Newton, and crucially, Shakespeare. They weren't well known in France before that.
So Voltaire accidentally kicked off a whole trend.
Pretty much. The success of Lettres philosophiques sparked what the French called Anglomanie.
Anglomanie.
Yeah, a real craze for all things English. English food, English fashion, those distinctive English gardens.
Yeah.
They all became super fashionable.
Right. But surely there was some pushback. You can't have everyone suddenly obsessed with another country.
Exactly. There's always a reaction, isn't there? In 1757, this guy, H.L. Fougeray de Montbron, published Préservatif contre l'Anglomanie, the antidote to Anglomania.
Catchy title.
Right. He basically argued French culture was superior and dismissed British democracy as just mobocracy.
So, the classic cultural backlash.
It really highlights that cycle of influence and national pride, you know?
Interesting. Now, you mentioned Shakespeare. His influence seems to have gone even further, didn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in the German state.
Oh, absolutely. Anglophilia really took hold in the German states, late 18th, early 19th century, and right at the heart of it was this obsession with Shakespeare.
They even had a name for it.
They did. Shakespeare-omani.
Shakespeare-omani, love it.
In 1807, August Wilhelm Schlegel finished translating all of Shakespeare's plays into German, and it was huge, a sensation.
People loved it.
Absolutely loved it. So much so that some German nationalists started suggesting Shakespeare was actually German.
You're kidding. He just happened to write in English.
That was the claim. It just shows how intense their admiration was. English acting troops had actually been touring the Holy Roman Empire for ages, bringing Shakespeare over.
And Goethe was a fan.
A huge fan. Goethe described Shakespeare's plays as like a huge animated fair, and he linked it to Shakespeare being English, surrounded by sea and fog, active globally.
So his work was seen as capturing the English spirit.
That was the idea. And this was quite different from the more Francophile German critics back then.
How so?
Well, they preferred the strict rules of French classical theater. They saw Shakespeare as kind of messy, unstructured.
But Goethe disagreed.
Strongly. He famously credited Shakespeare with freeing his mind from those rigid French rules. He said, "I jumped into the free air and suddenly I felt I had feet."
Wow, that's quite the quote.
Isn't it? He even said if Shakespeare were alive then, he could only live with him. High praise indeed from someone like Goethe.
That is some serious enthusiasm.
And it stuck around. Apparently, as recently as 1995, the New York Times reported Shakespeare is still incredibly popular in Germany, maybe even performed more often there than in England.
Still.
The demand just seems endless. And linking it back, this Shakespeare-omani fed a wider Anglophilia. The English were admired for being sort of spontaneous, letting people be themselves.
Right.
And the historian Eustace Moser even saw England as a kind of model for a unified Germany. He saw it as having this organic, natural order where the aristocracy respected people's freedoms and felt a sense of national duty.
So England wasn't just cultural inspiration, but maybe a political model, too, for some Germans.
Right.
Okay, let's swing back to France. But later now, 19th century, sounds like views on England were more split then?
That's right. Very divided. You had figures like Charles Morris, a reactionary intellectual, strongly Anglophobic.
Anglophobic. How?
He saw Britain as destructive, like a cancer, undermining everything good, especially in France.
Strong words.
Very. But then, on the complete opposite side, you had someone like Hippolyte Taine.
The art historian and critic.
That's him, a devoted Anglophile. He hugely admired Britain for what he saw as its civilized aristocratic order, but one that also allowed for freedom and self-government.
Okay, so a totally different take from Morris. What did Taine like so much?
For Taine, Britain was almost the ideal political system. It balanced order and liberty. He was very suspicious of the masses, He saw the French Revolution as a disaster, basically power given to the mindless populace.
And Britain avoided that, in his view.
He thought so. He felt Britain had a limited state, but the people sort of instinctively respected the elite. He even came up with this idea of la grande idée anglaise.
The great English idea.
Yeah, which he defined as the persuasion that man was above all a free and moral person.
And where did he think that came from?
He linked it to what he called the Hebraic spirit of the British people and the influence of Protestantism, especially the Church of England.
Hebraic spirit, what did he mean by that?
Well, it was a common idea back then, linking certain moral characteristics to ancient Hebrew traditions, seeing them as a foundation for Western values. Taine thought these were particularly strong in Britain.
Okay, so religious beliefs shaped national character.
That was his argument. Because Protestant Brits had to justify themselves before God, he thought they developed this culture of self-restraint with moral rules that applied to everyone, including themselves.
Interesting theory.
He wasn't overly impressed with ordinary British people, actually.
Oh.
No, but the gentlemen he met, he held them in really high esteem, praised their moral qualities.
Right, the gentleman ideal.
Exactly. He even noted, a bit enviously, that in France, gentilhomme just meant someone stylish or elegant. It didn't have the same moral weight as the British gentleman.
And he thought the British system produced these gentlemen.
Yes, he believed the British nobility was more meritocratic, more open to talent than the French one, which let them generate these gentlemen to govern. He also admired the public schools' Eton rugby for shaping boys into this mold.
Even though he had issues with some aspects.
Right, he found things like flogging and fagging pretty barbaric, apparently.
Understandable. Now, Taine's Anglophilia seems to have influenced another big name, Pierre de Coubertin. That rings a bell.
It should. Founder of the modern Olympic Games, he was heavily influenced by Taine's writings on England. After reading Taine's notes on England, Coubertin got this idea.
What idea?
He became determined to set up schools in France that could produce similar gentlemen. He got convinced that sports, the emphasis on sports in English public schools, was the key.
So French boys needed more sport to become gentlemen.
That was his thinking. He saw it as character building, very much in the English mold. He looked at rugby school in particular.
And he linked this to Britain's success.
He did. He thought Britain's global power, its empire, was partly down to this focus on sport. He even kind of blamed France's defeat by Germany on the French not being enough like the British in that physical and moral development sense.
Wow.
And like Taine, he actually admired the hierarchical side of British education. He noted quite approvingly that only richer families could afford public schools.
And he thought France should copy that.
Controversially, yes. He suggested France should ditch the dangerous pipe dream of an equal education for all and just follow the British model.
That is a pretty stark view on education.
It really is. He read Tom Brown's School Days, loved that novel, and Thomas Arnold's essays, The Headmaster of Rugby.
Right, Arnold of Rugby.
And became this firm believer in what he called the regime Arnoldian. The Arnoldian regime.
Which involved?
Regular boxing, rowing, cricket, football.
Yeah.
He thought this system would create muscular Christians and gentlemen in France.
Muscular Christians.
That was the term. He even wrote that boxing was the natural and English way for English boys to settle their quarrels, and that putting a solid pair of fists in the service of God is a condition for serving him well.
Goodness, a very specific vision.
Very. He actually met Gladstone, the British Prime Minister, in 1888.
Oh, really? What did they talk about?
Coubertin asked him if he agreed that Arnold's reforms at rugby had sparked a British Renaissance.
And what did Gladstone say?
Gladstone apparently said the idea was novel, but right, which is quite something.
Yeah.
Later, Coubertin went to the Wenlock Olympian Games in Shropshire, organized by a Dr. William Penny Brooks.
Wenlock Olympian Games. Never heard of them.
They were inspired by the ancient Olympics. Coubertin was captivated. He felt games like that, with national and local pride mixed together, could only have come from England.
And that led to the modern Olympics.
That was the spark. Those games inspired him to organize the first modern Olympics in Athens in 1896. It's quite a direct line from his Anglophilia to the Olympics we know today.
Amazing. So Anglophilia literally helped revive the Olympics.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gear again to the Balkans, 19th century. Sounds like Anglophilia took on a different meaning there, linked to the Eastern question.
It did, yeah. British policy towards the Ottoman Empire, which was declining then, was complicated.
How so?
Well, they feared Russia expanding into the region, but they also had humanitarian concerns for the Christian populations living under Ottoman rule.
A balancing act.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Then in 1876, there was this brutal crackdown on an uprising in Bulgaria. The Bulgarian horrors, they were called, shocked the West.
Right.
Disraeli's government, the conservatives, they were focused on realpolitik, seeing the Ottomans as a necessary buffer against Russia, so they tried to downplay the atrocities.
With the opposition.
The liberal leader, William Gladstone, took the opposite view, passionately supported the Balkan peoples. He publicized the massacres in this really influential pamphlet.
Right. Big figure.
Huge. And he demanded Britain support their independence on humanitarian grounds.
So a real ideological clash.
Exactly. The government favored the Ottomans strategically, but Gladstone's advocacy for human rights and Balkan independence made him incredibly popular among many Balkan Christians.
They saw him as a champion.
They did. They thought, wow, Britain is a country that can produce someone like Gladstone. And that led to this surge of Anglophilia, which was interesting because historically, Balkan Christians had often looked more to France or Russia.
And Muslims more to the Ottomans.
Yeah. Generally, yes. Gladstone's consistency, he criticized anti-Chinese laws in Australia. supported Irish home rule. It really cemented his image as defending the oppressed, defending small nations.
So Gladstone became this symbol of British liberalism and fairness for them.
Precisely. And you see key Balkan Anglophiles emerging then. People like Vladimir Jovanović and Adomil Mijatović in Serbia.
Okay.
Ioannis Gennadius and Eleutherios Venizelos in Greece. Ivan Geshov in Bulgaria.
And what did they admire?
British liberalism, especially the Gladstone kind, they saw Britain as a model liberal power with institutions that served the individual, not just the state, that inspired their own nation building.
And the UK itself as a model.
Yes, they admired the UK as a union that seemed to have brought different peoples, English, Scots, Welsh, Irish, together peacefully. They saw it as an example for their own multi-ethnic nations.
Though maybe overlooking some of the internal tensions within the British Isles at the time.
Quite possibly. They might have focused more on the ideal than the complex reality.
All right, let's dig into some of those names. Dositej Obradović in Serbia, an early one.
Yes, a writer, philosopher, Serbia's first education minister. He's seen as the pioneer linking Serbian and British cultures in modern times.
Okay. And Vladimir Ivanović.
He was a liberal economist, politician, deeply influenced by John Stuart Mill and, of course, Gladstone. He argued Britain should be Serbia's model for modernization.
How?
In an 1863 pamphlet, The Serbian Nation and the Eastern Question, he actually drew parallels between British and Serbian history's shared struggles for freedom.
Wow.
He famously said England had achieved progress in the best way, that all the conditions for progress were present there.
High praise indeed. What about Idomil Mijatović?
Mijatović's Anglophilia really blossomed after he married a British woman.
Ah, personal connection.
Exactly. He was the Serbian minister in London several times, lived there for years. He translated loads of British books into Serbo-Croatian, especially ones promoting liberal values.
And wrote his own books.
Yeah, several in English. He was a big advocate for liberal ideas, like championing equality at the Hague Peace Conference. He said he felt like a citizen of the world in London.
Nice.
And like many Balkan Anglophiles, he hoped for some kind of union between the Anglican and Orthodox churches. He even wrote historical novels inspired by his favorite author.
Let me guess. Walter Scott.
You got it. Sir Walter Scott shows a real deep dive into British culture.
Definitely. A real immersion.
Yeah.
Okay. And Ivan Geshov in Bulgaria.
Geshov was educated in Britain, also deeply influenced by John Stuart Mill. He actually played a key role in negotiating peace with Mijatović after Serbia attacked Bulgaria.
And they bonded over Britain.
Apparently, their shared admiration for the British helped them find common ground. Geshov then became a strong voice for liberalism in Bulgaria, pushing for reforms.
Interesting connection. And in Greece, Ioannis Gennadius and Eleutherios and Venizelos.
Right. Gennadius was a wealthy book collector, educated in Malta, later moved to London, worked as a journalist.
Using his platform.
Yes, he used the British press to defend Greeks after something called the Delesi murders. Later, as Greek minister in London, he really pushed the idea of shared interests, commercial, civilizational, between Britain and Greece.
Trying to build bridges.
Exactly. Strengthen intellectual ties. He even donated his huge collection of British books to the Greek people, a massive gesture.
Wow. And Venizelos.
Venizelos, a major figure in Greek politics, staunch Anglophile. He believed Greece could learn a lot from Britain, governance, development.
And this influences politics.
Hugely. His Anglophilia pushed him to support the Allies in World War I, even though the Greek king was more pro-German. It caused a major split.
Risky move.
Very. His big goal was the Mazzali idea, uniting all Greek-speaking people. And he thought an alliance with Britain was the way to achieve it. He also helped found the Anglo-Hellenic Educational Foundation, showing that long-term vision for cultural exchange.
It's amazing how this admiration played out politically across the Balkans. Okay, now for something completely different. Anglophilia's resistance in Nazi Germany and occupied France.
Yeah, this is a really powerful and frankly quite moving part of the story. Late 1930s Germany, you get the swing youth, die Swingjugend.
Yeah.
Mostly middle-class teenagers, mainly in northern Germany. They actively rejected the official Nazi youth groups, the Hitler Youth, the League of German Girls.
What do they do instead?
They embraced English music, which was mostly American swing and jazz, music the Nazis hated, and Hamburg, with its old ties to Britain, became their sort of capital.
So it wasn't necessarily deep knowledge of England, but using Englishness to rebel.
Exactly. It was a powerful cultural rebellion. They adopted an English style of dress.
Like what?
Checkered coats, Homburg hats, umbrellas for the boys, curled hair, makeup for the girls. Totally different from the clean-cut Nazi ideal.
They spoke English.
Yeah, they preferred using English among themselves, a kind of code. And as Nazi propaganda got more anti-British after 38, the swing youth's Anglophilia became this clear rejection of the regime. They even welcomed Jewish and mixed-race teenagers into their groups, defying Nazi race laws. Guido Fackler described it well. Their love of American music and English style rejected Nazi ideology, uniformity, militarism, the whole suppression of freedom.
So swing music represented freedom.
Yeah, self-determination, internationalism, everything the Nazis stood against.
That's incredibly powerful, using music and fashion to defy them.
Yeah.
How did the Nazis react?
Harshly, especially after Britain declared war in 39. There's a big raid in Hamburg in 1941, about 300 swing kids arrested.
Arrested? What happened to them?
At least 70, seen as leaders, were sent to concentration camps.
Concentration camps, just for liking swing music and English style.
It shows how threatened the regime felt. While they weren't initially overtly political, that kind of persecution pushed some towards being actively anti-Nazi.
And there's a similar thing in France.
Yes, the Zazus. Similar vibe. Adopted the style anglais, used English phrases, loved British and American music. Simone de Beauvoir even wrote about their distinctive fashion.
Again, those outward symbols of Englishness as resistance. Fascinating. Okay, let's hop over to Eastern Asia. The Karen and Shan people in Burma.
Right, another unique situation, this one rooted in historical alliances. The Karen people, many were converted to Christianity by British missionaries. They'd long felt oppressed by the Burmese state.
So they saw the British differently.
Yes, they developed a strong sense of Anglophilia. And similarly, from the 1880s, the sons of the Shan elite went to British-style schools, fostering appreciation for British culture institutions.
And this played out in wartime.
Definitely. The Karens fought alongside the British in the Anglo-Burmese Wars, and crucially, during World War II. They resisted Japanese Pan-Asian propaganda, stayed loyal to the British.
Wow.
One Karen veteran explained why they resisted the Japanese. "We really liked them, the British. We preferred fighting along with our friends, a real sense of allegiance to the crown."
So genuine bond through shared history, shared values.
It seems so. And ironically, after Burma got independence, many Shan actually became nostalgic for British rule. They remembered it as a time of relative peace, prosperity.
Nostalgic.
Yeah. One Shan man even criticized the British for putting the Shan states into independent Burma against their wishes. Felt betrayed after their loyalty during the war.
It really shows the complex legacies, doesn't it? How different groups experience colonial rule so differently.
Absolutely. Very complex, often unintended consequences.
Right. Let's cross the globe again, Brazil. Anglophilia had some interesting backers there.
It did. The famous Brazilian writer Gilberto Freire was a big Anglophile.
What influenced him?
19th century British Romantic and Victorian writers, mainly. He was from northeast Brazil, which had strong trade ties with Britain, so he associated Britain with modernity, progress.
And he wrote about it.
Yep. In his book, Ingleses, No Brazil, the English in Brazil, he even used his idea of the British Empire, seeing it as a positive, multi-ethnic model to help shape his theory of lusotropicalism.
Lusotropicalism.
Yeah, his influential theory that presented racial mixing in Brazil as a uniquely positive thing. He wrote a lot about British figures, promoted British and Irish writers in Brazil.
Interesting. Was his Anglophilia political?
Initially, it came from the left, actually. He admired the British Labour Party's post-war reforms.
But there were conservative Anglophiles too.
Yes, Plinio Correa de Oliveira represented a more conservative type. And it's worth noting, some Brazilian politicians have cited Winston Churchill as a major influence.
So Anglophilia cropping up across the political spectrum there.
Oh.
Okay, now something maybe closer to home for some listeners. The American Jenites.
Ah, yes, the devoted Jane Austen fans in the U.S.
It's quite a phenomenon, isn't it?
It is. The cultural critic Robert P. Irvine argues that Austen's popularity, especially the films, became kind of cultural capital for the white Anglophile East Coast elite from the late 19th century onwards.
Cultural capital, meaning?
Like a sign of good taste, maybe good breeding. He quotes Lionel Trilling saying not liking Austen might suggest a want of breeding.
Ooh, pointed.
Isn't it? Irvine suggests that Americans, with their whole egalitarian ideal, can't fully embrace Austen's hierarchical society.
It seems contradictory.
But that world offers an appealing aesthetic. Order, class, elegance, emotional depth. He contrasts it with American nostalgia for the pre-Civil War South.
Which is obviously problematic.
Exactly, because of the undeniable link to slavery. So Austen's Regency Britain becomes this less politically loaded, ordered society for nostalgic Americans to connect with.
Makes sense.
He does acknowledge that the boom in Austen films since the 90s could be seen as part of a conservative cultural agenda, but he warns against just calling it implicitly racist Anglophilia.
So what does he think is the real draw?
He argues the appeal connects to our modern hierarchy of leisure and consumption, where status is mostly about wealth.
How does Austen fit into that?
He thinks Austen's world, despite its rigid social rules, actually feels surprisingly relatable to modern America, even though Americans don't like talking about class much.
And it's escapist.
Definitely. Romantic love is central. Things usually end happily. And he makes another interesting point about the films, especially since that famous 1995 Pride and Prejudice.
Colin Firth in the Lake.
That's the one. He says they've largely catered to the female gaze, showing attractive male actors in ways usually reserved for women in film. The appeal of characters like Mr. Darcy, he suggests, is this absolute and unconditioned male need for a woman, which many female viewers find compelling.
And the heroines themselves.
Still relevant, he thinks. Watching them navigate patriarchal societies still resonates.
Lots to unpack there. Very insightful take on why Austen stays popular in the U.S. Okay, quick shift to a more current example. Hong Kong.
Right. Since the 1997 handover, you see continued Anglophilia, especially among older Hong Kongers.
Why is that?
Nostalgia for the British colonial era, partly. A feeling that British rule was maybe preferable to the growing influence from mainland China, and a desire to keep a distinct Hong Kong identity.
Are there visible examples?
Sure. Figures like Martin Lee, the pro-democracy politician, or Grandma Wong, often seen waving a British flag at rallies.
And younger generations, too.
Commentators see it among some younger people as well, even those born after 97. They use British symbols in pro-democracy protests, show interest in Hong Kong's colonial history.
Even if they don't want British rule back.
Exactly. Many still appreciate the British common law basis of Hong Kong's legal system.
So, Anglophilia tied up with identity, legal traditions, political feelings. And lastly, a quick mention of Kosovo.
Yeah, just that after the Kosovo War, British KFOR soldiers got a really warm welcome from locals.
Like how?
During an England-Kosovo football match in 2019, streets in Pristina apparently had welcome and respect banners everywhere, lots of English flags, messages of thanks.
Wow, clear sign of appreciation there. We also had that list of notable Anglophiles, quite a mix.
It really is. Actors like Ben Affleck, Gillian Anderson, musicians, Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber, writers, Bill Bryson, Tom Clancy, politicians, JFK, Lee Kuan Yew.
It just underlines how wide-ranging the appeal of British culture has been, doesn't it?
Absolutely. People from all walks of life, all over the world, drawn to different things about Britain.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. We've seen Anglophilia pop up in so many different places, different times.
Yeah, manifesting in really surprising ways, driven by everything from politics and literature to resistance and just plain nostalgia.
What's really striking is thinking about why in each case. Why Shakespeare in Germany? Why Gladstone in the Balkans?
Exactly. What is it about Austen that still grabs that particular American audience? Looking at those specifics really tells you something about cultural influence, how it adapts.
It really does. And it leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about all these historical shifts, global connections, how might Anglophilia change in the future?
Yeah, what new bits of British culture might capture people's imagination? And where in the world might we see it emerge next? Unexpected places, maybe.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.